Good morning. Welcome to the 40th South Bay Roundup. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. 1984. I got sober in 1984, February, but because of just being sober, I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about AA, and I didn't know anything that was going on in AA, and quite frankly, I didn't care. So they started this event, and that was the only one I've ever missed. The next year I came and found this fellowship that you all are finding, I hope, if you're here for the second or multiple times or the first time. Sample it. It's overwhelmingly rich, this roundup. Overwhelmingly rich. So like that hummingbird, go to where you're fed and enjoy it. My name is Herb and I'm an alcoholic. And I'm here to talk about the joy of living. Not normally a topic that you hear in Alcoholics Anonymous or any of the 12-step programs. And I am in Alcoholics Anonymous and have been since about April of 1984. I was struck sober, a story for a different day, on February 21st, but I didn't know anything about alcoholism and or 12 steps and or AA or nothing. Hospital program that said, stop drinking to support your wife's recovery. She was in the hospital February 10th for her drinking. She was a very bad drunk. I was glad to see her in the hospital for lots of reasons. Again, a story for a different day, right? But they asked me to stop drinking on February 20th, and on February 21st, I celebrate my anniversary of not drinking and not having any inclination to drink for the next 40 plus years. I cannot explain that. I'm in eternal gratitude and really humbled by it because I know many of you have struggled with it. Every year since then, I read the respective chapter of the 12 and 12 on the steps, January, step 1, etc. So clearly in December of last year, January probably of last year, I reread for the 40th time chapter 12 in the 12 and 12, and I was struck with this phrase, the joy of living. Well, it resonates with me because it is my experience. These are not just words. There is so much power and light and energy and reverberation in the words for me. And so I thought I would adopt that as my theme for the year, and I've done a couple presentations. Sometimes I talk about the work that I do as a workshop here because a lot of times I do a workshop where there's participation with the people in the room. But that won't happen today, although I will stick around after my presentation. I will have a presentation. Now, if there's some itch that you really do need to scratch in terms of a question and or a comment, you could raise your hand, and if I'm in the mood, I'll recognize you. Yeah, you know, we're gentle here, gentle. So I didn't know that I didn't know, and I couldn't see that I didn't see. These are phrases that I've adopted for my own experience, not to be cute, but they seem to have resonated with a lot of people. It's kind of like, oh, I finally name what my experience is, and I'm sure every one of you here, because you're in some form of 12-step program, can relate to that. My words and my experience come out of my interpretation, my literal and precise interpretation of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Full disclosure. And the application of the 12-step process that's in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. If those are relatively new words to you, or you really don't know what they mean, the big book as a textbook and the instructions as precise application of the steps to your personal life, then you might want to really listen carefully, and you're even welcome to email me and or talk to me after the event to kind of get a sense of what I'm talking about. Could it change my life? But I was 5 years sober when it happened. I was not in the bondage of alcohol, but I was in the bondage of unmanageability, and I didn't know and I couldn't see. Because I'm 5 years sober and I'm calling a sponsor every day and I'm going to a meeting every day. I think I'm a Renaissance man with my background. Some of you have an idea of my background. It's an extensive background of seeking. Some of you don't. It's not relevant. But I wasn't a finder, and I didn't know that I wasn't a finder because I thought seeking was the deal. Let me just tell you right now, part of the joy of living is that I found the secret to joy. I found the secret to happiness. I was given the gift of the secret of sobriety. That's still a secret. I don't know how I got sober, and I don't know how you get sober. Because I really understand and have experienced powerlessness. Think in terms of no choice. As a synonym for powerless, no choice. If there's any one thing that we can do, we're not powerless. And I mean it. Meetings, sponsors, steps, book, prayer, helping others. All the moving parts that we know about as the protocol and ritual within the 12-step program. Nice. Necessary. But not necessarily effective in terms of precipitating that connection with the power. But it seems like they're preconditions. I didn't do any of the preconditions and I received the gift, and I work with a lot of people who do the preconditions and they suffer for years before they get sober. I do not understand that mystery. The big book suggests on page 84, right at the end of the 9th step, right after the promises, that we are placed in a position of neutrality. Hear the language, though. I'm a wordsmith. I pay attention to the words that Bill uses. I try to understand the words in the big book that Bill wrote in 1939. We are placed, grace, in a position of neutrality. It's a promise. It's a guarantee. Neutrality, I'm not resisting it. I'm not attracted to it. It just is not relevant to my life. But the same can be said for unmanageability. Ooh. You won't hear this in many meetings, and I don't want to create a controversy, although what I'm about to say might. The goal, of course, the original goal, the presenting problem was alcohol. Now it's addiction, because the 12 steps have been used for any type of compulsive, negative, out-of-control behavior that leads to negative consequences. But I'm saying it today, and I've said it for about a year now, boldly, because I have the experience of it for 35 years. But I finally got the courage enough, and maybe even the consciousness enough to say it. The 12-step process is an invitation to us to manage our lives. Herb, no, God manages our life. Well, no. I do understand the spirit of it, let God manage your life, put God in the driver's seat. I understand the spirit of it. It's just wrong. Oh, no. I'm not going to apologize or qualify it. Think about it for just a minute. When you get in your car, assuming you have one, and it's your car, and you have a driver's license, and perhaps you have insurance on it, I hope you do, and you know where you want to go, but you don't know how to get there. So what do we do today? We put the address into the GPS, whether it's built into the car or on your phone, and then you listen to the instructions and begin your journey. God's not driving the car. The GPS is not driving the car. You are. Your responsibility is to know where you're going, to have the correct address, to listen and to follow direction. Whoa, there's the formula. We're done for the day. No, that's the shorthand. I never know what I'm going to say, by the way, and so it's just I'm channeling whatever it is in the room today, based on being guided by my own PowerPoint. So I do have a map to follow. Let's see if I actually do that. Two things now that we're officially started. Number one is we're scheduled to go from 9 to 11. And you're welcome to leave at 11. I may not be done, and I'm going to continue. I've talked to Dave. He's going to continue to record it at least for a few minutes to see if I can wrap it up by whatever time. At 11, I believe it's the Al-Anon luncheon. And by the time they sit down and get serving, it'll be 11:30. So you're welcome to leave at any time, of course, for any reason. I encourage you to stay until I'm finished. And I'm just warning you that I may not finish exactly at 11 o'clock, but it will be within 5 or 10 minutes of that. Number two, in the back of the room is a table with some material on it. I don't have enough for everybody other than the one handout on my resources. I have a website and YouTube channel and some other things that might be helpful to you as resources, no matter what program you're in, or even whether you're in a program or not. My work is for anybody who wants to spiritually awaken. Whether you've identified that you have an addiction and whether or not you're in a 12-step program is none of my business. But I now know the 12-step process will give you an awakening if you apply it and are guided by somebody who knows what they're doing. I hope you just heard what I said. There's no sponsored training program. Yeah, well, everybody knows that. It's kind of like on-the-job training. And I suffered as a result of that for 5 years because I didn't know that my sponsor didn't know. But I'm so new that I didn't know that he didn't know, and he didn't know that he didn't know. Well, no, likes the blind leading the blind. But I found a man who I reverberated with in a meeting, and he only spoke for 5 minutes. And the rest is history. 1988, I've been on this path awake since 1988, 35 years. So he gave me this phrase: the consciousness that created the problem cannot be the consciousness that solves the problem. He said, Herb, you have a lot of information. 5 years sober, we're sitting in a restaurant after the meeting. I asked him to help me. He said, you have a lot of information, but you have very little transformation. You have a lot of knowledge from all of your background, but it's never filtered through your heart to your feet and changed you. He said, you think you're a Renaissance man. Actually, you're a Neanderthal. I knew right away I was going to have a hard time with this one. So join me in a prayer for an open mind and an open heart. This prayer is just a bunch of words. Prayer is about words. but it's more about intention. And I changed the prayer based on my intention, and my intention today is to talk about freedom and joy. So let's pray that prayer together if you can read it on the screen. Fortunately, I have the screen in front of me, so I'm not going to be looking back there. If there's anything amiss, let me know, because I won't know. Please join me. Just out loud if you care to, quietly if you don't care to speak it out loud, and not at all if you don't feel like you want to participate or for any other reason, but have the intention of an open mind and open heart. The intention, that's what prayer is, the intention. Are you willing to be delivered today in this next 2 hours? I mean it with all my heart. It could happen to a place that you don't even know exists. Yeah, I heard it. Amen. God, please set aside everything I think I know about myself, my awakening, my freedom and my joy, and you, for an open mind and a new experience with myself, my awakening, my freedom, and my joy, and especially you. I'm a great believer in context. So I'm going to go through some things that are just basic, and then get to some things that are perhaps the best kept secret in the rooms. That was my topic last year. The best kept secret in the rooms. If you want a copy of that recording, see Dave. He's probably got it down on his recordings table. He's been recording me for a couple decades now. But here's a question. Where's your life not working? Where's your life not working? What's the source of your suffering? If you're suffering, what's the source? How effective have you been with your own efforts? You see, just 3 weeks ago in my home group meeting, I heard the ABCs for the umpteenth time. I've been going there, this weekly meeting for 40 years, and for the very first time I heard it where it vibrated with me, the ABCs on page, whatever they are, 60, yeah? The B, and no human power. That's what we mean by powerless and no choice. It's not in the big book said this way, but I capture the spirit of powerless, no choice when I say, I'm screwed. Yeah, it's a bit gross in terms of I don't like to talk that way, and yet I like to get your attention with it. Most people don't really embrace the experience of no choice on my own power. And they're always asking, if only I did, if only I knew. What does it mean, freedom? The big book promises freedom from addiction. Page 84, as I mentioned. But it also promises freedom from unmanageability. We're not cured, we have a daily reprieve. He doesn't tell us from what, pages 84 and 85, does he? But he's already told us we have freedom from addiction neutrality, so I'm assuming it means freedom from unmanageability. He doesn't say it that clearly, but I think it's exactly what Bill means in the big book. We're free to be responsible to use our free will responsibly and effectively. And he says it, we grow in understanding and effectiveness. Here's a question at the conclusion of all the books I read on happiness. The most recent was a study from Harvard on happiness. Anybody who wants to be happy and that's their goal will never be happy. Whoa, that's in your face. Really, anybody who wants to be happy and that's the goal of your life will never be happy. And it went on to say, because happiness is not a product, it's a byproduct. It's a byproduct of my relationship with life, meaning, context, and my contribution to the community of humanity. Wow, that sounds so much like steps 11 and 12. My relationship with power with a capital P, and my contribution to humanity through helping. What brings you joy? And the conclusion of the article on happiness from Harvard, oh my God, it's so, well, let me say it. It says, if you want to be happy, avoid suffering and embrace joy. It's kind of like, wow, Harvard, thank you so much. Wow, thank you so much. Oh yeah, avoid suffering and embrace joy. But if you hear that, that's your responsibility. To avoid suffering and to embrace joy. But the question is, what brings you joy? And every one of you will have a different answer. Hopefully, a thoughtful answer that resonates with your own personality and your own circumstances, what you want and what you need. My most favorite word probably for the last 25 years at the end of my morning meditation, which I've been doing for 35 years since I did the steps with this man I just talked about. I have a consistent step 11 meditation which has broadened and deepened over time. About 25 years ago, the voice said to me, "This is your invitation today." Oh, I love it. So every morning when I finish my meditation, I ask, what's my invitation today? And I get quiet and listen to the voice. Not here. I'll talk just a little bit about it later on. Meditation is my most favorite subject. I have more recordings on YouTube on meditation and prayer and contemplation and the differences and etc. all about intentional consciousness, my broad term to capture all the forms of our efforts in this direction, intentional consciousness. Hazelton asked me to write a book on it about 7 years ago, Practicing the Here and Now, if you're interested. What's the invitation today, right now, for this next hour and a half? What's your invitation today, right now? And it might correspond to what do you need and what do you want? What do you need and what do you want in order to be free and in order to embrace joy? Very quickly, I come from a model of human development. Originally, I saw it in a schema presented by Maslow, a psychologist. In part of my studies, I'm not a psychologist. I studied to be one, but I gave it up. Well, let's say alcohol gave it up. I made lots of left turns. And he starts off with the physical. All right, the physical. And I don't know whether you can see it or not, but sleep is in all capital letters. Well, yeah. If you're not getting enough sleep, you're sleep deprived. What's enough sleep, Herb? 7.5 to 9 hours consistent on a daily basis. No hands, please. But ask yourself, are you getting 7.5 to 9 hours of sleep a night consistently? Most people are not. For all the reasons that you know, I don't have to spend any time talking about it. But without that, the lenses are blurred and the energy is dissipated. And then, of course, emotional. Lots of conversation today about emotional sobriety. I was introduced to it about 20 years ago by Dr. Alan Berger. And we began doing presentations on it. There are several YouTube recordings of my own work on emotional sobriety as well as combined work with him over the last 20 years. Bill wrote his letter on emotional sobriety in 1956. It was published in the Grapevine in 1958. He called it the next frontier, but it didn't catch on. There was a book written in the 80s called Second Stage Recovery, which was really about emotional sobriety, which didn't really catch on either. But about 20, 25 years ago, it began to resonate with the recovery community, and now you'll hear it all over the place. When you read the 12 and 12, and I recommend that you do that, there are very few descriptions of how to work the steps in the 12 and 12. But there's wonderful commentary. Bill wrote it when he was about 20 years sober, 1953. The 12 and 12 was written and published in 1953. Bill was about 20 years sober, and the 12 and 12 is populated with the term emotional sobriety. Bill had 20 years before it became in his consciousness that this was the next step. And this is what we're talking about today, emotional sobriety in the broadest of senses. Now I need to get closer because my eyes are not that good. And then the social part. And it correlates with the brain mechanisms and structure. I'll talk about that in just a minute to show you that there's a correlation between the 12 steps and how we're built as a human being. There's a direct correlation. This is not a spiritual process, this is a human process. For self-actualization, I call it conscience. That's our step 10. For self-realization, I call it consciousness, step 11. Self-transcendence, lots of $25 words. Yeah, and I call it compassion, 10, 11, and 12. Bill calls it our way of life as a noun and our way of living as a verb. I've just written an article on that, which will be published in the next couple of weeks. You may or may not know that I distribute reflections on a weekly basis. So you heard the question before. Am I a human being seeking a spiritual experience, or am I a spiritual being seeking a human experience? Well, I take stuff like that seriously. And I take it into meditation. And my reading and my conversations are all around whether that's got some meaning to me. Am I a human being seeking a spiritual experience, or am I a spiritual being seeking a human experience? And you know what my conclusion was after about 6 months? Yes. Yeah. Two sides of the same coin. I am human, yearning to be divine. And I am divine, navigating being human. Bill recognized that in step 3. As he says we commit to a relationship with God, pages 62, 63, read it, a relationship. He talks about 5. He doesn't say it as clearly as I'm saying it, but I'm elevating it so that it might be visible to you. We want a relationship with God, and his first recommendation is, and so you got to quit playing God. Oh. And I didn't know that I was doing that until I did a 4th step. This is the distilled version of step 12. To have an awakening. I don't need the word spiritual. It's a synonym for relationship. Spiritual. An awakening, it's guaranteed. It's the biggest promise in the big book and is hardly ever talked about. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. It couldn't be clearer as a promise. As the result of these steps. Because it's about relationship. A relationship with power, those first 3 steps. A relationship with myself, the next 4 steps. A relationship with others, the next 2 or 3 steps. You could include 10 in that. I don't, because Bill talks about our way of life and our way of living as 10, 11, and 12. I believe that's what he means by not cured in a daily reprieve. Daily use of step 10. Daily use of step 11. Daily use of the principles of the universe that are embedded in me to help others around me. It's that simple. Notice I didn't say sponsor. I didn't say anything to do with 12-step. Don't need to. This is a human process with human implications. And I use the word spiritual merely to connote relationship. Relationship with life itself, capital L, whatever that means to you. Just in the last couple years, I've attempted to wake people up with this phrase. The Big Book suggests God as we understand God. Wonderful. I understand the intention of it. It's brilliant. I believe it saved AA from being useless at some point. God as we understand it. But the truth is, God as we don't understand it. 40 years. I have a robust spiritual life, by my definition. I don't understand God. Like Groucho Marx said about country clubs. You're way too young to know who Groucho Marx is. But it was a TV comedy show back in the 50s and 60s, and he said, any club that would have me as a member, I wouldn't want to be a member of. Yeah, great. Well, any God that I can understand is too small. Because whatever it is, this reality is infinite, and this is finite. You cannot put the ocean in a bucket. So our problem is addiction. But it's not the general problem of society. It's only 10 or 50%. Choose your number, choose your addiction. Who cares right now? Because I don't want to talk about addiction. All right? Now, it is a problem. It's just not the problem, and Bill says it. Page 64, if you have any doubt, look at page 64. Make notes. Don't look at your book if you have it. Just make a note. He said, we have a physical problem, we have a mental problem, but we have a spiritual problem. And when the spiritual problem is taken care of, the mental and the physical problem go away. Unmanageability is the problem for addicts. Please hear this. Herb's opinion, really. Unmanageability is the problem of all humanity, of each person. But what does it mean, unmanageability? Bill tells us, not as clear, again, as I'm making it clear, because I've had teachers who made it clear to me. He gives us a behavioral description of unmanageability on page 52. Make a note. If you don't know this, it'll change your life. Now, I'm going to say that many times about different things because it's true and it's my experience. And it didn't happen all at once. I did the steps 4 times in 10 years with 4 different people. And each time progressively broader and deeper awakening. Each time broader and deeper light. Each time like the dimmer switch. Click, click, click. The dimmer switch went up a notch at a time. And there was more light progressively. In fact, accumulative enough that there was enough light for me to see that I didn't see. And then eventually to see that I saw. And then eventually to see that I didn't see at all. Oh, yeah, no, I'm not being tricky. I'm not being cute. I really don't mean to be a poet here. All right? I really am trying to just capture words for my experience and maybe help you put names to your own experience, because that's really the key here. And he asked me to turn it into a personal pronoun present tense, the items on page 52, the behavioral description. This is what it looks like. Ask yourself, am I having trouble with personal relationships? I'm not going to go through it in any depth. I'm just going to let it ring, vibrate with you. And then you take it and do what you want with it. But it changed my life. I was 10 years sober when I was given this exercise. I had already had 2 major awakenings through going through the steps with really mechanics of the Big Book and the step process. I called them step guides. They never became my friends and they never became my sponsors, but they were mechanics with the Big Book and the application of the process in the Big Book. I can't control my emotional nature. I am a prey to misery and depression. I can't make a living, and the voice said to me, and you can't make a living that satisfies you. And it went on to say, Herb, you're never satisfied. You're a black hole. You're a bottomless pit. I said, thank you for sharing. I have a feeling of uselessness. I am full of fear. I am unhappy. I can't seem to be of real help to other people 10 years sober. And the voice said, and Herb, you don't care really about helping people. You don't care. You don't even relate to the word caring. But you want the reputation of helping other people. And I was confronted with my own narcissism at the time. And I didn't know that I didn't know, 10 years sober and having a background in psychology and therapy. And that was the description of that Neanderthal that I talked about earlier. If you have any doubt about what is Bill's definition of self-centeredness, not that everybody's narcissistic, I don't believe that for a minute. But the 9 points and characteristics of a narcissist are very embarrassing to read. So we need power, because Bill says we're powerless over it. Powerless over addiction, page 43. Having no mental defense. Powerless over unmanageability, page 62. We can't even reduce it much by wishing or trying on our own power. Bill was brilliant with the use of his words and the structure of the process and the methodology of awakening. Not always was he conscious of it or made it visible to us. The bedevilments are in page 52 in chapter 4. The description of unmanageability, the description of the exact nature of unmanageability are pages 60 to 62 in chapter 5. Read it, apply it, use the personal pronoun present tense from 60 to 62, and then read it out loud. And be prepared. If you haven't done it before, be prepared to turn red from embarrassment in your own presence. Well, that's what happened to me. 10 years sober. And that prepared me for some new approach to, I was given the set-aside prayer. New approach to steps 2 and 3. Asking, what do I need? What do I want in terms of power? What is the life force that opens the acorn to become the oak tree? This is a meditation. This picture is a profound meditation. What is the life force that cracks the acorn open and becomes the oak tree? Because it's that life force that is our life force. That's what Bill talks about. Appendix 2, read it if you haven't, 567, 568. Unsuspected inner resource. Oh, I have done workshops on that phrase and appendix 2 for an hour or two. It's such a deep and broad implications for us all. Corresponding to page 55 in the Big Book when he says, deep down inside us, and that's only where this power exists. Deep down inside us. Unfortunately, most of us and some of our ministers, God in heaven, and I understand the spirit of it, and it's certainly true, but today I get centered deep in myself with the life force that is in myself, that is the life force of my very life force. And I try to have a conscious relationship with that. A decision to turn. So many misinformation spread in the rooms. Step 3 isn't about surrender, please. Step 1 is complete defeat. In fact, the word surrender is not in the big book. Check it out. Not in the first 164 pages. It's a great term for step 1, but step 3, listen to it. Made a decision to turn. It's a ferocious act of my will. It demands on me for me to turn my will and my life over to the care, not to God. Pay attention to the words. To the care of God. GPS? We're cute in AA with acronyms. GPS, God Positioning System. I didn't make it up. I stole it from somebody. Another word that's not in the big book that broke the code for me for step 3. Alignment. What does it mean to turn? What does it mean, God's will? I don't believe God has a will. I don't think God has any moving parts at all. God doesn't come and go. God doesn't reward or punish. Whew. These are huge concepts which I'm not going to defend or even explain right now. Happy to send you some material on my reflections. Not that I understand at all, but I understand my lack of understanding, and I meditate on it. So here's the life force, that acorn that creates the life, the oak tree. Here's the life force. Watch my hand. You have to look up. Here's the life force. And here's Herb with his free will. And Herb always makes decisions to get what he wants, regardless of reality, regardless of objective events and people and places and events and circumstances. And the turning that Bill talks about, I believe, is the turning from that self-centeredness. That's his word for unmanageability, self-centeredness, pages 60 to 62. Oh, shit. My clicker is unmanageable. Put that little dude on a string. Maybe I put it up here. There you go. So, Herb makes decisions based on self. And when I do a 4th step, I identify that, the exact nature, my selfishness, self-centeredness, and I turn to be in alignment. This is the word that's not in the big book in step 3. This is the word that helps me understand step 3. I want to be in alignment with the flow of the life force, the flow of reality with a capital R. Reality just is. Emotional Sobriety 101. Reality just is what it is. Byron Katie. Reality is what it is, but only 100% of the time. And it's not personal. Reality's not personal, it just is. And we try to manage reality to our wants and needs, and we get kicked in the head. And we suffer, and eventually we get crushed until we find a way to turn to be in alignment with the flow of reality. At least these are my words that attempt to express my understanding and my experience with the process. I'm going to invite you to prayer again. This is going all right, I think. I'm going to move up. Now, this is the 3rd step prayer, but it's elevated to a little more current language, no these and thys. or thous. You pray it any way you want. You don't have to pray it at all, but have the intention of. This is the commitment. Step 3 is a commitment to do steps 4 through 9. Step 3, it says it on page 58. If you are willing to go to any length to get what we have, then you are ready to take certain steps. The beginning process of the 3rd step with no amen, because it's the beginning of a process of establishing a relationship with myself that ends with step 7, in which it has a definite amen, after praying to my Creator to recreate me. Please join me. God, I offer myself to you to build with me and to do with me as you wish. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do your will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of your power, your love, and your way of life. May I do your will always. See, step 11 has the integrity of responding to that, the way we're built. Think about step 11 and how it ends. Praying for the knowledge of God's will and the power to carry it out. Because Bill already has said, some of us don't know what to do, but most of us do know what to do. We just don't do it. I know better, but I don't do better. That's a short definition of unmanageability. And so we're invited on a daily basis to be guided, the word that is used by the Oxford group in terms of meditation. They sat in meditation for guidance. A little bit about that in a minute. So Bill in step 4 asks us, this is all about emotional sobriety, by the way. It's all building the framework and the underlying assumptions of emotional sobriety. When we get to step 10, I think you'll see that, if you don't already know that. Bill in step 4 asks us to look at our resentment and our fear and our sex. Inventory. But not to beat ourselves up with the behavior and the thoughts and the feelings. No. To get to the exact nature. Be careful. Read the big book as it's intended to be read, understanding the words that Bill used. He was very precise with his language. It is a textbook, the big book. The exact nature, resentment and fear and sex. But then when we look at it clearly, resentment is about anger. Resentire, from the Latin sentire, to feel. Anger over and over again. Fear, that anxiety that's paralyzing, that procrastination that ruins our life on a daily basis. Now, this sex thing is a little tricky. Well, if you've looked at the sex inventory, curiously enough, it's on page 69. No comment. But it asks a lot of questions. By my count, there's 9 questions. You know, not one of them is about gender. Not one of them is about position. Not one of them is about frequency. Not one of them is about location. Because the sex inventory isn't about sex. It's taking a look at our sex behavior to understand our motives and our impact on others. Oh, dishonesty was the word that rang my bell. To be dishonest, to camouflage. So it really connected to the biology of psychology, fight, flight, and freeze. You've heard the terms, but look at the application here for understanding step 4. Fight, anger. Flight, run. Fear, freeze. Camouflage, hide. If I'm in a yellow environment, turn yellow. If I'm in a green environment, turn green. If I need to protect myself and I can't fight and I can't run, camouflage myself, dishonesty. And it rang my bell because that was my go-to default position. Rather than anger-based and fear-based, I'm shame-based. I didn't know shame was a feeling until one of my good friends as a psychologist pointed that out to me. And it was the dominant reaction I had, both probably genetically predisposed, but also from my family of origin. And I began to know that from the therapy and the reading that I had done. But Bill says it very clearly. These are all survival mechanisms, self-centered, unmanageability, and, page 62, I'll quote it again, we can't even reduce it much by wishing or trying on our own power, so we need to have power. We're powerless over it. But once I did step 9, I found freedom. Well, notice, same picture. Pathetic Herbie's still in jail. He's got his hands clenched on the bars. He's got his face pressed against the bars. He still thinks he's in jail, but now he's beginning to realize there's no roof, there's no ceiling, there's no floor, there's no walls. It's just pathetic Herbie holding on to the delusion that he's in jail. Freedom is just releasing the bars that imprison us, which are the delusion that we're in prison. And we have to take responsibility for creating the prison and then for its dismantling. We need to take responsibility for our own freedom. This is emotional sobriety. Taking responsibility. They use fancy words like taking agency. I have free will. The Big Book says we don't have free will in step 1. We don't have free will with regard to any addiction, but it also says we don't have free will with regard to unmanageability. But then on page 47, entering step 2, he said, willingness is the cornerstone to a spiritual arch through which we walk to a new freedom. And on page 53, he asks the question that rends the curtain. God is or God isn't, what is your choice? Oh, in step 1, it's clear I don't have the power of choice. In step 1, I don't have the power of free will, even with regard to unmanageability. But now you're asking me in step 2 to use my free will? Oh yeah, not about addiction and not about unmanageability. But to use my free will, God or no God. We are confronted with the question of faith. Check it out, page 53. Confront yourself with the question of faith. The dictionaries will help a little bit, not a lot. But I call faith a decision. Faith is a choice, and that's what he's asking us to do. Walk through a spiritual arch through which we walk to a new freedom. The foundation is step 1, because the cornerstone is step 2. You need to place a cornerstone on a foundation. So he doesn't talk as clearly as I'm talking, but I can imagine the words and thoughts and concepts in between what he's trying to deliver to us, which is a model, a metaphor for this journey, building a spiritual arch through which we walk to a new freedom, and step 3 being the keystone, that stone which holds the entire arch together. And then we end up, after step 9, awakened his promise, but not cured. And we have done steps 4 through 9 in order to have that awakening. He says on page 84, we enter the world of the Spirit. Here we go, emotional sobriety, basics. He doesn't say it in the Big Book. He implies it in the 12 and 12. We enter the world of the Spirit. Where the hell have we been? We've been in the world of self, steps 1 through 9. Now we've been delivered to the world of the Spirit. The model's the same. The human being's the same. Body, mind, and will. This is my model of the human being. This is my model that helps me understand the 12 steps and the application of each of the steps and all of the steps. He uses the term in the second title page. Check it out in the book. Second title page. The first title page has the name of the book itself, Alcoholics Anonymous. The second title page, how many thousands of men and women have recovered. And he uses that term consistently through the book. Not recovery, not recovering. I don't mean to be controversial, but I do mean to be precise and clear. That's the synonym for neutrality. Addiction is a problem. It's just not the problem. Physical sobriety, guaranteed at the end of the 9th step. But we're not cured, he said. He doesn't tell us not cured of what. But my assumption is, since he's already said neutral with regard to addiction, he's talking about the second half of the first step, unmanageability, not cured of unmanageability. I have a daily reprieve based on keeping the channel clear. Let's think of the St. Francis prayer, make me a channel. That's the metaphor that I use here. Keeping the channel clear through step 10. Notice the 12 and 12 clarifies for us the use of step 10. There's so much misinformation. Not that it's very harmful at all, but it takes away from the real understanding of the effective and proper use of step 10. Step 10 is not in writing. Not in the big book, not in the 12 and 12. No place that says it's in writing. And it's not at night. No place in the big book, no place in the 12 and 12. Because it's a spot check inventory, he says in step 10 in the 12 and 12. On the spot when I'm disturbed. He says it's a spiritual axiom. When I'm disturbed, there's something amiss with me. I don't like the word wrong, so I just substitute. There's something amiss with me. When I'm disturbed, it means I'm out of alignment with reality, and I need to be back in alignment with reality. And I have a daily practice of step 11, prayer meditation. I'm going to talk about it in a minute. To fill the channel with light. I'm not the light. My metaphor is I'm the lantern. I need to keep the lens of the lantern clear. That's step 10. I need to fill the lantern with light. That's my step 11. And then I allow the light in me that is not me, that shines through me and through the clear lenses to others to light the path so that they can walk the path in the light of my experience to have their own experience. I'm not trying to create little Herbies. Some of you are saying, thank God. No. As sponsors, please, give them the dignity of their own experience. Give them the dignity of a relationship with their own God. And let them be awkward and fumbling in finding their way. To empty the channel, I believe it's, there's a song, maybe Aaron or something like that, that talks about letting the light in through the wounds in us. And Bill says, and we let the light out through the wounds in us. He says our liabilities become our assets because it's our experience that other people can identify with. I was broken. I did the steps and I was healed. And now I live a life that flourishes. Whew. That's a message of depth and weight. I was broken. I have been healed. And now my life flourishes, especially when I try to bring the healing to other people. The word healing's in the book a little bit, but it's certainly in the reference when when Bill says in the book, Jesus said to the people, pick up your mats and live your life, walk again. Now, he came from the Oxford group, a Christian group, first century Christianity. That's history. I'm not supporting it or touting it or evangelizing. I'm merely reporting so that we have an accurate sense of what Bill means by what he says in terms of these stories and these words and these concepts. All right, now we're fully into emotional sobriety. And I'm going to ask you to ask yourself, do you have a sense of well-being today? Balance in your life. One word captures the reality of emotional sobriety. Balance. That's my Achilles heel. Bill says in the big book, lack of power is our dilemma. In my book, for me, lack of balance is my dilemma. I'm constantly off the middle path, and having to rebalance, to recalibrate daily, weekly. But it's okay because it's not gross anymore. It's subtle. Most people don't even recognize it when I'm out of balance. Do I have a sense of contentment? Well, doesn't Bill talk about happy, joyous, and free? No. It's in the big book. I'm not sure exactly where. But that's a phrase. Happy, joyous, and free. I won't be happy unless I'm joyous and free. I will be joyous and free if I'm free of my addiction and free of my unmanageability, and I have a conscious relationship with life itself, a conscious relationship with reality. I recognize reality is just reality in the flow, and I need to be in the flow, and if in fact I'm not in the flow, I will be disturbed. Yellow light on the dashboard. If I'm disturbed, pause when agitated or doubtful, right? Now, this is now a very minor lesson in the brain structure because it correlates with the way Bill has structured each of the steps and all of the steps. Over millions of years, this animal, eventually called human, developed a brain stem, like a lizard brain. It determined when we eat, when we sleep, when we mate, and with what we mate. Do we mate with it or do we eat it? I have sponsees like that. Gotta lighten it up a little bit. My motto is heavy does it, and I just kind of I get so tired of my heavy does it. Yeah, exactly. And so the second brain that made us truly animals, warm-blooded, is our limbic system. There's a second brain for emotions. And the whole point of emotional sobriety is allow our cortex, the final development of the brain that gives us our humanity, gives us our soul, if you can use that term loosely, please, that life force in us that allows us to know and to decide. Those are the two things that make us human. You couldn't have a mindectomy. You can't have a willdectomy because they're not an organ, they're not a place, they're a function of the cortex. And this is what we inform and train and get some habits with so that we can regulate our emotions and we can regulate our instincts. That's the clearest definition of emotional sobriety. Using my mental faculty and my willpower faculty to manage my emotions and to manage my instincts. Instincts are just reactive to stimuli. Emotions are merely reactive for survival. They're all reactive. But our brain, our cortex, that which makes us specifically human, can be proactive to know better and to do better. and at least to know better and to realize we're not doing better, and therefore to try to do better. It's our beliefs that are the prison, the lenses through which we look. They're distorted. I didn't know, like Chuck C's book, I needed a new pair of glasses because my emotions were disturbed. 5 years sober, all the time. My home group got so, they must have been so patient with me. They never once said, don't come back, you're a mess. But I was a mess, and I keep coming back, and I treated meetings like therapy. Well, they're not, but it was okay. When I did the steps, I realized what was making me disturbed. I was wrong. I was seeing incorrectly. My beliefs were delusional, and my motives were corrupt. And I didn't know that I didn't know. And I did that inventory of resentment and fear and dishonesty and selfishness. No. Now I'm right into 10th step. Page 84. It's those 4 items. It's right there. He says, watch for, and then he says, when they crop up. Now pay attention to the words. When they crop up, not if. We're human beings on a daily basis. These will be our instinctual and emotional reactions to survival, to life itself. Because normally, life isn't really corresponding to my needs and wants. People, circumstances, and events, they're busy doing what they want and what they need. And it doesn't necessarily correspond to the script I have for my life, let alone their life. Hello, Al-Anons, how are you doing? Yeah, exactly. So he has a formula. Spot check inventory. On the spot I pray. Oh, God help me. And then I discuss it with somebody. Anybody. We discuss it with anybody. I would discuss it with my executive secretary. At the time, she'd been with me for 15 years, saw me drunk, saw me get sober, saw me struggle with all of this and get the step work and then begin to become a decent human being. And I would go to her and I'd say, Kate, if you see me misbehaving with you or anybody else, bring it to my attention because I might be the last person to know. And she regularly said, Mr. Kagan, you're being a jerk. And she would keep little snacks in her desk because she knows that when I get hungry, I'm a real jerk. Yeah, I mean, just simple things like that. But I would make the amends to the person that I offended right there. I said, oh, Kate, I really want to be a better person. And I would thank her for having the courage to confront me and the love in her heart to do it gently and not publicly. She knew that. Okay. Pray, discuss, make amends if you've created harm. It doesn't mean that every time you're disturbed that you're disturbing somebody else, although I seem to have a correlation. Well, I like to share. Yeah, I like to share. If I'm disturbed, I want to disturb you. Or inevitably I will. Mm-hmm. But here's the key, and it's in all caps. Selfishness is in all caps. It's the centerpiece of unmanageability, selfishness. It's not a negative term. It just means on my own willpower, I will always choose me. On my own willpower, I have no power other than that. On my own, I will choose me. It's a survival mechanism. I'm wired that way. And I have to learn how to pause and choose others to help, for instance. Now, this I make up just from the antonyms to the first column. Resentment is, the antidote for that is forgiveness. Look at my hand. Forgiveness. Look it up in the dictionary. A decision to release them. St. Francis' prayer. When we forgive, we are forgiven. The Lord's Prayer. When we forgive, when we release them from their debts, we are released from our debts. The Lord's Prayer, 100 AD. St. Francis' Prayer, 1800 AD. St. Francis didn't write it. He lived in the 12th century, but it's based on his philosophy. But the point is the dynamic is the same. And if any of you want to do some extra work in forgiveness, first of all, do steps 4 through 9. That brought me through a process of forgiveness, steps 4 through 9. A process of forgiveness, which I didn't know was a process of forgiveness until I finished the 9th step and then met Dr. Fred Luskin, who is a psychologist at Stanford, a teacher there who wrote his dissertation on forgiveness, and his book is Forgive for Good. You want to know about that? Let me know later on, and I can email it to you. Forgive for Good, the second best book I've ever read. That's high praise. I read a lot, have read a lot. The first book that's the most important book to me is the big book because it is the most effective change book that I've ever encountered. The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous changed my life permanently and radically in 1988, and it continues to change my life as I apply those steps on a daily basis. That dimmer switch goes up a notch at a time, and guess here's the really good news for us addicts who never have enough. We're in pursuit of the infinite, so there's always going to be more. Oh, yeah. Wake up every morning, wonder how it's going to improve today. Is that your song? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Trust is the opposite of fear. Check page 68 in the big book in the fear inventory. They are not mutually exclusive. If you have fear, you can have trust. But they're reciprocal relationships. To the extent I have fear, I don't have trust in God, in life, in myself. To the extent that I have trust, I don't have fear. A reciprocal relationship. There's the balance there. There's the middle path. The opposite of dishonesty. Check page 58, chapter 5. Think about it. The title. How it works. And the entire page, 2/3 of it, are about rigorous honesty. You think it might be important? Some people, I do, use the term radical honesty. Rigorous is good enough, but radical comes from the Latin word radix, meaning root. And I asked my sponsor about all of that, and he said transparency. And I said, what does that mean? Your outsides and your insides match. I didn't know what he meant. But I said, yes, Lloyd. Yes, Lloyd, sure, fine, great. Get on with it. And obviously, we put our desire and intention to help into action to be helpful. The man who took me through the steps was a real hard-headed guy. CEO of a Fortune 500 company. I loved it. He intimidated me the entire time. But he had it, and he held me accountable. And he said, willingness without action is fantasy. I love phrases like that. I hate them when they're applied to me. Yeah, willingness without action is fantasy. This is emotional sobriety. Step 10, I believe, is the primary tool of emotional sobriety because it helps us become undisturbed by turning to be in alignment with reality as it's manifesting at the present moment. All right, this is a summary of Fred Luskin's process to name the hurt, to understand my expectations. He calls it unenforceable rules. Each one of us has unenforceable rules for ourselves and for other people and for life itself. Unenforceable because they're a script that we made up and it's delusional. It's all about what I need and want. It has no relationship to objectivity. Identify the rules. What are my beliefs? I found, oh my God, it was so embarrassing. I was delusional. No, seriously, I was in therapy. I never saw it. I never saw it in therapy. It wasn't the fault of the therapist. It was like I hadn't thought out sufficiently. I hadn't thought out. At 5 years, I began to thaw out sufficiently. I began to acknowledge reality because of my attitude. My attitude was narcissistic, and I'll just admit, I said, how bad is it? And he said, on a scale of 1 to 10, he said, you're a 7.5, and we put 10 in prisons. Yeah. Well, I met him about 10 years later, the same psychologist, and I said, so, remember that conversation, 1 to 10? He said, yeah. I said, what does it look like now in your evaluation after we'd had an hour's conversation? He said, about a 2.5. Well, it's irremediable narcissism through therapy and or medication. Irremediable. And yet, hear it. The spiritual path, the path of the steps, the human path, the path of radical change to awaken, had modified so that I could live comfortably with my own skin and with other people, not offending them as often or as deeply. To accept responsibility, this is the key to emotional sobriety. You're going to hate me. You have exactly the life that you created right now. You know, the Buddhists have a fancy word for it. They call it karma, right? And all it really means is there are consequences to all of our actions, and our actions on an accumulative basis have produced the life that we have. I'm sure there's many other interpretations of karma, but that's at least mine right now in the context of this conversation. There are consequences. You can do I tell my sponsees, you can do anything that you want. Yeah. You can do anything you want, as long as you're willing to pay the price of the consequences. Yeah. So pay attention to your behavior. Pay attention to your feet. Your feet tell you who you are. Your feet tell you what your values are. Your feet tell you what your principles are. It's so objective. There's no negotiation. Oh my God, I'm robbing a bank. I'm a bank robber. Yeah, exactly. I'm not Robin Hood. And then we implement the decisions. And you heard Chuck C. and perhaps Clancy talk about action is the magic word. Action is the magic word. Willingness without action is fantasy. Forgiveness is a process of change of attitude, to acknowledge reality, to accept reality, and then take the actions that are consistent with reality. This came to me in meditation 25 years ago when I wrote a meditation on forgiveness. It's in the Way of Life document, and it's on my website. A forgiving person has no past, released. But an unforgiving person has no future. You're in the bondage of self, whether you know it or not. It's powerful. So we enter the world of the Spirit, the same diagram, but now I put up neutrality. And Bill calls it sanity. Lots of misinformation in the rooms around restored to sanity in step 2. Bill doesn't mean psychiatric and psychological, Herb's opinion, because he gives us a definition of insanity on page 37 at the end of Jim's story, who put a little whiskey in his milk. Yeah, well, disgusting, but anyway, that's the story. And he says this is plain insanity. He knows he's going to go to the insane asylum. He calls it unhealthy thinking, a lack of perspective. A lack of perspective, a lack of healthy thinking. And it comes from the Latin word sanus, S-A-N-U-S, which means health. And when you put an I-N in front of it, it means not healthy. Insanity in the big book means the vulnerability that addicts have to the obsession. the thought that hijacks us without our permission and without our consciousness. My definition. Obsession. A thought that hijacks us without our permission and without our consciousness. Powerless. There's nothing. If there's any one thing we can do to not pick up or engage in our addiction, if there's any one thing we can do, we're not powerless. There's nothing we can do. No. Hopeless. Dark. Despair. That's where I try to lead my people for the first step. The valley of death. Seriously. Now, of course, Bill gets us right quickly into there is a solution as he's kind of giving us the information and the experience of hopelessness and helplessness, because we do need just a little bit of hope. And that's what steps 2 and 2 is. It's about faith and hope. And step 3 is about hope and trust. We're not cured. We have a daily reprieve. Step 10 is the tool that keeps the lens clean of the lantern. And steps 11 and 12 I see as a spiritual coin, having two sides, 11 and 12. You've never seen a one-sided coin. You've seen coins that have some mark on one side and no mark on another side, but they have two sides. Well, think about it. It's a great metaphor for us. Step 11 and 12. That's what this was supposed to represent. The coin of the spiritual life. Step 11, a relationship with God. Step 12, a relationship with humanity. If I'm self-centered, then I need to be turned to be other-centered. Other with a capital O, or reality with a capital R. And others, meaning the community of humanity. It's really that simple. And he says we grow in understanding and effectiveness. Meditation. As I mentioned earlier, the prayer at the end of the step 11, knowledge of alignment, my words, knowledge of your will for me, and then the power to carry it out. Power to practice. Knowledge is the guidance that we get in our meditation practice, if we're looking for it, listening for it. I'm going to talk about that here in a minute, well, right now. Bill says, at the end of the day, so in the big book, the sequence is, he talks about step 10, after we enter the world of the Spirit, talks about step 10, what we do during the day. All right, we intervene when we're disturbed by the use of step 10. And then when we get home at night, we're usually a little calmer and we can do inventory. So he says, when we retire at night, that's how he starts his discussion on step 11. When we retire at night, we do inventory. Now there's a little more positive attitude in the questions that he has. I'm not going to go through it. You can read it. Pages 85 to 88. The best description of meditation, what it is and how to do it, that I've ever read. And I was a monk for 7 years. I was in a monastery and silent for 7 years. I haven't stopped talking since. So I know some spiritual shit. All right? Pages 85 to 88, the best description of how to do meditation, why to do meditation, and what meditation is. But it's not that clear. I couldn't read it in those first 5 years. But when this man took me through the steps, he said to me, look at Upon Awakening, Herb. It says we ask God to direct our thinking. It's a prayer whenever we're talking to God. You've heard it in the meetings. Prayer is when we're talking to God. Meditation is when we're listening to God. Beautiful wisdom, which I never understood or unpacked until this man helped me. He said, it's a prayer upon awakening. And it goes like this. God, please direct my thinking. Yeah, smiling anyway. It's that simple. The big book then gives us instruction. We ask God to direct our thinking. Then we begin thinking about our 24 hours ahead and considering our plans for the day. 2 instructions. I have no idea what Bill meant by think about the 24 hours ahead and consider your plans, but I make stuff up. Yeah. Think about the 24 hours ahead is about my day planner. What's my activity today? Sometimes I actually have the day planner open so that if it's a particularly busy day, I can see the sequence of things. And I pray about that. And then consider your plans for the day. Well, if think is about your activity, perhaps consider is about my being. Who am I going to be today? Oh, yesterday I was insensitive. Today I'll be sensitive. Yesterday I was distracted. Today I'll be mindful. Whatever the antidote is for the character defect du jour. Yeah. We never get perfect. All right. Release it. Bill says at the end of the 12 steps, page 60, right? Progress, not perfection. There's no such thing as perfection. In the material world, there's no such thing as perfection. Because by definition, it's material. It had a beginning, it has an end, and it's corruptible. It will change. There's only one that is perfect. That one is God. Oh, I just quoted the book. Right? And I don't even understand that. Right? Because I'm looking at it and thinking about it with an imperfect mind and a finite mind. I cannot put the ocean in a bucket. But I can say, sounds like Disneyland fairy tale, but I'm going to accept that it's true and I'm going to live my life as if it is. There it is. I'm going to accept that it's true and I'm going to live my life as if it's true. Now here's the word that is not in the big book that unlocked the mystery of meditation for me. After 7 years in the monastery, 7 years of silence, 7 years of constant meditation, I hung up my black robe in 1964 and walked out and didn't meditate again for another 25 years. Well, what's that? Well, that's a young man who became a monk by putting on a robe, and monks meditate. So when I took the robe off, not knowing what meditation was or the value of it, I didn't meditate because I'm not a monk anymore, right? Made sense to me. I mean, this was all unconscious. I can see it now in retrospect, which is the only time I see anything truly. And so then he said to me, we ask God to direct our thinking. We think. Meditation is about directed thinking. It is not about no thinking. It is not about silence. It is not about distance from the mind. That's another project, another methodology called contemplation. I won't even talk about it now. I'll get distracted. Meditation, directed thinking. He said, this man said to me the word that is not in the big book, but it was the key that unlocked the door to meditation for me. And I've not had a problem with meditating since 1988. Not a problem at all. He said, listen. And he said, not here, not with your ears. Listen with your thinking. Listen to your thinking. Whatever you're thinking, consider it communication from God in response to the prayer. I ask God to direct my thinking. Then I begin thinking. Then I listen to my thinking and ask myself, what in there is God's inspiration? Coming from the Greek word spiros, breath, inspiration, the breath of God in me. What in there is the inspiration for today? Now, if I have any doubt as to whether it's God-inspired or narcissist-inspired, because the ego never dies, it just goes to sleep sometimes.
or morphs into some other camouflage because I'm a dishonesty expert, then I have a sponsor or a step guide or a good friend or a companion or a partner where I can talk about it. I have 2 daughters in 12-step program. One in Al-Anon for 30 years and one in AA for 30 years. They're wonderful sounding boards because they love me enough to tell me the truth. They're not my sponsors. I made sure they understood that. Thank you. Those of you who certainly know them know that each one of them would love to sponsor me. And so then he says, what do we do all day long? 24 hours of consciousness, or maybe probably 16 if we're getting 8 hours of sleep. What do we do all day long? Awareness. In the back of the book, Appendix 2, all about spiritual awakening, spiritual experience, he has a line. It's fabulous. Awareness of the presence of God is the essence of a spiritual experience. Awareness. That consciousness. There is no place that there is not God, said one of the mystics. God is closer to me than I am to myself, said another one. In between me and God, there is no between. Words to meditate on. Could it be true? And on page 55, when Bill concludes step 2, think honestly, search diligently, search fearlessly. Deep inside, that's the only place you will find this reality. Paraphrasing. Then he says, a promise. With this attitude, you cannot fail. Attitude. Oh, sailing, attitude. The sail, the keel, the rudder, the sail, the wind, attitude. I'm not a sailor, but I hear some sailors talking about the attitude of the wind so that I can set my sail and catch the wind and get empowered. These are the metaphors that nurture me. With this attitude, you cannot fail. What attitude? Think honestly, search fearlessly, search diligently, with my mind and with my will. See, the steps are built for us as human beings. And so the practice, and this is what I call step 10, 11, and 12 is a practice. Recently, I've thought about, we practice life. It so releases me. I practice life. And sometimes it's a little better than others, but I'm just practicing it. And one of the words that I've incorporated, because it's true for me, I have nothing to defend. I live undefended now. I don't live perfectly, of course. I'm a perfectly imperfect human being, all right? Doing the best I can to become a better human being every day. That's my goal, to become a better human being, especially to help other people become better human beings. To wake up to this message of the 12-step effectiveness. I'm passionate. You can tell I'm passionate about it. I've dedicated most of my waking hours to it. So one of my teachers says there's only 2 mistakes that you can make in meditation. Not show up and leave early. I love the simplicity. All right? He said you're responsible for the effort and the results are none of your business. The heavy coat of responsibility to become spiritual or to be a good meditator. Rabbi Heschel says we don't meditate to become good meditators. We meditate to establish a conscious relationship with our Creator, a conscious relationship. An act of faith, I've talked about that a little bit. Awareness, not a feeling. It's wonderful to have feelings. It's wonderful to have feelings, to feel good, of course. But don't be seduced by it, in the spiritual life especially. You will feel the pink cloud. It's any of this work that you do. and it may not last. Mine actually has lasted, all right? I've been excited with the adventure right from the beginning, even when I didn't know that I didn't know, because I was beginning to find a solution, and I didn't know that I was finding it, but I knew that I was seeking it, and somehow I was becoming a better person. Awareness, not a feeling. An experience, not a task. And not information either. Information was important for me. And then I had to translate it into action in order for it to be an experience. That's the combination. The knowledge that becomes an experience. Life-changing. That is the awakening. To carry this message, the 12-step process is about awakening. It's not about addiction. The 12-step process is about establishing a relationship with power. That's it. There's only one reason to do the 12 steps. There's only one reason to be in a 12-step program. And Bill says it very clearly in the book, although it's not repeated very often in meetings. Find God. Find your God. Find your personal power. Establish a relationship and then foster that relationship. Principles. I call them guidelines and guardrails. Guidelines and guardrails. Principles like gravity. If I drop this clicker, as you saw me do, it falls to the ground. That's gravity. It's immutable, non-negotiable. It will happen every time. Reality is like that. When we talk about practice these principles in all our affairs, Bill uses the synonym principle for the steps. He doesn't ever give us a list of the principles. Many people have made efforts to give principles for each of the steps. I've taken their work that I've seen and added my 2 cents. And just last year, I changed my approach to step 10, using the word vigilance rather than any other word. So it's a dynamic process, and you'll see it in my Way of Life document, a list of principles and the description of it and the actions that go with it. Practice these principles. Reality just is. And if I go against reality, I will suffer. You know, it's that simple. If you're suffering, it's because you're out of step with reality. If you're suffering, you are out of step with reality. All right? I haven't suffered in 35 years. That's pretty outrageous. Now, have I had pain? Of course. Life has a lot of speed bumps, but this process gives us the shock absorbers to handle the speed bumps. But I haven't suffered because I have a process. I have a plan. I have the steps. I have a step guide, and I have a community that supports me. That step 12 promises a change. That is an awakening. Done to us, not by us, but not without us. Our way of living. Tried to carry this message. Bill calls it immunization. Well, we're all very sensitive now, coming out of the COVID, not so recently, to the whole inoculation and immunization. Read the first line in chapter 7 on page 79. Nothing will so much ensure immunity from our alcoholism as intensive work with others. The only explanation, true explanation in the big book for Jim's relapse, the guy who put a little whiskey in his milk, is that he failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life. Well, what does he mean by that? Bill doesn't tell us there, but he does on page 14. We perfect and enlarge our spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others. Work and self-sacrifice for others. I know. Practice these principles in our relationships, chapter 8, in the family, chapter 9, in our workplace, chapter 10, and in our fellowship and community, even though it has a fancy title, A Vision for You, a great title, A Vision for You, setting that vision of a life well lived and that can flourish. but it's about relationships with our fellowship and with our family. This is the indication I mentioned earlier about the dynamic of the steps correlating to the way we're built biologically, psychologically. All of the even steps are knowing steps. All of the odd steps are decision and action steps. This is it's an insight that I came to that has helped me understand the dynamic of each of the steps and all of the steps, built specifically for us as human beings. All of the even steps are knowing steps. All of the odd steps are decision and action steps. A process, though, like the dimmer switch, it goes up a notch at a time. Physical sobriety, emotional sobriety, spiritual sobriety, body, mind, and will. But it goes down a notch at a time. Dr. Tebow says, although the 12 steps, especially steps 1 through 9, are for the deflation of the ego at depth, the ego has an uncanny way of regenerating itself with a little bit of compromise of our principle. I heard that phrase last year. I was reading something, not in a 12-step context, but I applied it. The relapse is not the drink. The drink is the symptom of a relapse that happened yesterday or last week or last month or last year. The relapse was the first compromise of our principle. Oh, my God, is that rigorous. I mean, that's in your face. The first compromise of your principle is the slippery slope that will eventually take you out. The obsession will return and you'll be back in your disease, in the darkness rather than the light. I'm just going to show this, and you can see it. It's about that turning from the disease, and you can see the opposite, to be at ease. My will out of alignment, my will in alignment. And I have the concepts of forgiveness, honesty, freedom as the benefits of our attempt to be in alignment. And I've recently, within the last couple of years, been addressing the people in my workshops that are perfectionists. About 50% of the people in my workshops, which I've been doing for 30 years, are perfectionists. And I just became really aware of that. And I began saying to you, I'm not one. I strive for excellence, but I'm not a perfectionist. That's a whole conversation for another day. Whatever we do is good enough, even though we know it's not good enough, even though it may not be good enough. But if we accept that it is really good enough, and that I'll be taken to a better place, then it is good enough. Whatever we do is good enough, knowing that it's not good enough, and we do it anyway. And I can almost hear the sighs of relief from people who go, yeah, exactly. Because it's my experience now. You've heard the journey, doing the steps 4 different times over a 20-year period with 4 different people. Progressively getting more awake, progressively becoming more behaving myself in terms of the principles of life, becoming more conscious progressively. And today I wake up every day excited about what kind of consciousness I'm going to have today, because it's more. I mean, even some of the stuff I've been quoting in the last few minutes has come to me just in the last year as awarenesses and insights. The first 9 steps are the steps for freedom from addiction, optimal recovery. Those final 3 steps are for optimal living, for joy. This is the theme of what we're talking about, freedom and joy. Those first 9 steps. There are some people that believe in one and done. You do the steps once and then you live in 10, 11, and 12. And I understand that. I'm just not that rigorous. So I had to do the steps 1 through 9 4 different times over 20 years. I haven't done them since 20 years ago because I do live rigorously now, vibrantly in 10, 11, and 12. All right? If I ever feel the need to do it, I will respond to it. I always want more. Exactly. And so one of my favorite sayings was brought to my attention by a psychologist. He said, on the west side, there's a psychologist, a therapist, who has a big sign over the entrance to his door. Nobody's coming. Can you imagine going in and paying a guy like that? All right, nobody's coming, but I took it seriously. I said, oh, what a great, nobody's coming in my meditation because I'm the one I'm waiting for. I know. It was such a journey, 48 years old, 5 years sober, before I began discovering, oh, I'm not a victim. No, I was victimized. Let's be really clear. Again, a story for a different day. But I'm not a victim. Today, I'm not a victim unless I choose to bring the bars and look through the bars that are a delusional lie about my life. Because I am free. So we practice this step 10 rather, and taking responsibility for alignment. And we practice step 11, to be aware and to be awake and to stay awake. The most important thing here is I'm not responsible for the results. Get your eyes off the judgment. Show up, don't leave early, do the best you can, knowing it's not the best you can, and embracing that, today it's good enough. Today it's good enough. Become that lantern. Practice, that's the key. Practice life. Practice 10-step. Practice 11-step. This is our way of living. A verb. Our way of living vitally, vibrantly, freely. But who's coming to help them? We are the one they are waiting for. You know, if you really read the literature very carefully, Bill, and before him Ebby, and before him Roland, all reached out. Roland reached out to Ebby. Ebby reached out to Bill. Bill reached out to Bob. Bob and Bill reached out to Bill, the third guy on the bed. It's proactive. And I heard in the meeting, and I adopted the practice, sure, you can give your number to people and say, call me. That's nice. 99% do not call you. And so the suggestion was, which I've adopted, ask for their number. And then call them in a week if they haven't called you and see how they're doing. Proactive. Go 10 minutes early to the meeting and kind of survey, is there anybody there that might need a conversation? Stay 10 minutes after the meeting. Is there anybody there that might need a conversation? I go to meetings because I want to stay civilized. Well, yeah. I mean, I'm a monk. I love my solitude. But it does funny things to me when I'm too alone. I get just a little warped, and I don't know I'm warped because I'm looking through my warped lenses. It looks fine to me. Yeah, until I meet somebody else and I have issues. So we practice compassion in transmitting the light. We call it a big word, self-transcendence, meaning we transcend ourselves, meaning that we have a relationship with other and we have a relationship with others. Joy is our daily practice. Now, this I want to spend a little time on. Gratitude, and everybody's heard about the gratitude. It's clear in all of the traditions, all of the psychology, all of the science, all of the anything I've ever read on self-help. Gratitude is life-changing. Now, here's a particular approach to gratitude. You've heard about gratitude lists. All right? I'm going to talk about it, but not in the way you've heard it before, unless you've heard me before. Have a list, but put one thing you're grateful for on it for that day. Just one. One thing today you're consciously grateful for. Then the next day, put another thing you're consciously grateful for. But the rule is, your rule, not mine, your rule, you can never repeat what's on the list. You get it? 30 days, 60 days, 90 days in, and you've got 60 or 90 different things, and you can never repeat anything that's on the list. And you have to use all your creative skills to come to an imagination as to what you're grateful for today. And that's the point. A growth in positivity. It's a habit. It's the antidote to negativity. It's the antidote to resentment. Gratitude. It's the introduction and the door to humility. And then prayer, of course. And most of us have an easy time with prayer. And we've got several in the literature and several in our 12-step meetings. It's wonderful. That intention. Please don't confuse prayer with words. It's not about words. It's not about repetitive words. It's not about asking or thanking or... No. It's about what's your intention? Intention to have this relationship with life or with the power other than ourselves. Meditation, of course, is about guidance and power. I've already talked about that. Every one of you has a cell phone. I bet you every one of it plugs it in every day. Oh, why do you do that? Oh, because it won't work if it's not plugged in. You mean it runs out of power if it's not plugged in? Yeah. Well, how much power do you have? Do you believe in power, even? Can you plug into power for 1 minute? 1 minute a day. Not praying, not reading, not listening to a podcast or an app. 1 minute of directed thinking. 1 minute of intentional consciousness. You do that for 30 days in a row, you will have developed a meditation practice. In my book, I say this very boldly. If you can think, you can meditate. If you can think, you can meditate, because it's about directed thinking. Now, you're not going to do it, even the minute, you're not going to do it the way you want to do it. It's going to be filled with distraction. If you need to have a timer, get a timer. I had a timer because I was concerned about the freeways and traffic and that kind of thing when I was working. I don't have a timer anymore. I don't need it. Set the timer. 1 minute. The timer will tell you when you're done. You don't have to think about it again. What you want to do is think about your relationship with power and then pay attention to what's going on in your thoughts and in your feelings and in your imagination and in your memory. Anything that's going on that you're aware of, pay attention to it as a possible invitation. And then, of course, helpful actions. The Buddhists talk of a great phrase, loving kindness. Loving kindness, an attitude and a behavior. The most important moving part, I believe, in the program is sponsorship. Ask yourself, do I have a sponsor, meaning I have an accountability partner? I actually talk to them periodically, and I'm actually honest with them. If you don't talk to a sponsor, it's because you don't think you need it or they're not capable of giving you what you need. If you don't trust your sponsor, it means you need a new one. Transparent. Your life is on the line, that's all. Become a lantern, light the path. I've just said this about sponsorship. Oh, this is from the Concepts. It's just beautiful about freedom. Freedom under God to grow in God's image and likeness will ever be the quest of Alcoholics Anonymous. Image and likeness comes from Genesis, the first book of the Hebrew Bible, called the Torah, the first 5 books. The first book is Genesis. God made humans in God's image and likeness. God made them male and female. It's a line to meditate on, especially in our culture today. God made humans. That's just another shepherd on a mountain thinking about life like we do, writing a little note to himself that happened to get codified. Bible meaning library of books. Nobody sat down and wrote the Bible. All right? It's just a good literary, at the very least, good literature. And that Genesis, God trying to explain creation, trying to explain humanity, image and likeness. Image, I know. Likeness, I decide and can take action. Maybe, just maybe, that's the divinity in me. Our freedom to serve is truly the freedom by which we have our being, the freedom in which we have our being. It's just a very powerful meditation, poetry, metaphysical invitation to get really connected to freedom. My feet determine my freedom. I mentioned that. You want to know who you are? Pay attention to your behavior. Your behavior will tell you exactly who you are. If you're lying, you're a liar. There are no such things as white lies. It's either a lie or not. Principles are immutable, non-negotiable. What are your principles? That was the key that came out of 1988 working through the steps, especially the sex inventory. What should I have done instead? I began to realize I had principles. I didn't use them, but I had them. And I didn't have some principles that would have made me a decent human being. So I began to adopt those principles. Now, to determine what those principles are, my values, I had to look at my actions. What are my actions? How do I behave? My feet tell me what my principles are. My feet tell me what my values are. We do exactly what we want. Oh, that's in your face. We do exactly what we want, whether you believe it or not. Everything you have done in your life up to this point is exactly what you wanted to do. Consciously or unconsciously, I won't even go there right now. The problem is suffering. The solution is freedom. The promise is joy. That's the turning from our self-centeredness to other-centeredness. Yeah, there we go. Freedom, right? I just had somebody send that to me because I didn't have a conclusion to the other 2 slides. There's the freedom. I drop the bars and I can live in a life of joy and freedom, a joy of living head in the clouds and feet on the ground, as Bill said. But in the big book, our daily practice. Trust God. Really? Do you? Do you? Trust life? Trust reality? Trust that there is a power that cares? Do you? Really? He uses the word abandon ourselves. Really? Clean house, steps 4 through 9. Help others. I think that's 10, 11, and 12. 11 and 12 certainly. 12 certainly. This is our way of living. So join me, in an adaptation of the 7-step prayer. I'll be around afterwards if you want to have a little chat. Please join me. This is an adaptation, Herb's version, current version. I'm tinkering. Please join me if you care to. Well, I'll get out of your way then. Look at that. Yeah. Say it nicer. I'm sensitive. At the end of the third step prayer, there's no amen. Steps 4, 5, 6, and 7 are to remove the darkness in us that prevents us from having a relationship to the light in us. And we ask at the end of the 6th step with the 7th step, we ask my Creator, is that wonderful? No accident there. My Creator, you made me. Now I need to be remade. I need to be fixed. I need to be repaired. I need to be recreated. I am powerless, but I'm responsible. I can pray, but I need to be held accountable. I need to hold myself accountable. I pray because I'm powerless. I use accountability because I'm human. Please join me. My Creator, I am now willing that you have all of me, healthy and unhealthy. I pray that you now remove from me every single inclination and behavior that stands in the way of my usefulness to you, my helpfulness to others. Grant me knowledge, strength, courage, and humility as I go out from here to try to do your will by trying to be in alignment with reality as it really is. Amen. Thank you, everybody. Well, thank you.